Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing how to create our first Django application with a very simple view. So far, we've been able to use run server to test our installation of Django. Now let's move on to actually creating our first Django application. We'll learn about views and how to use them. Let's get some terminology straight though before we continue. A Django project is a collection of applications and configurations that when combined together is going to make up the full web application or website. That's your complete website running with Django. A lot of times people use the term web application to describe a website, so try not to get it confused with a Django application. A Django application is created to perform a particular functionality for your entire web application. So for example, you could have a registration Django application or a polling Django application, a comments Django application. So a polling app, comments app, etc. These Django apps or Django applications can then be plugged into other Django projects, so you can reuse them, or more importantly, use other people's Django applications. This process of being able to take a Django application and plug it into another Django project leads to the terminology of pluggable Django applications. Okay, let's continue on by creating a simple application with the following command. We'll go back and use that manage.py file. We're going to be using it a lot throughout the course, and we'll say Python manage.py start app and then first underscore app. So within our Django project, we're creating a Django application. I'm going to jump to Atom to get started. Alright, here I am back at the Atom text editor. And right now I'm located under the first project directory, that top level directory. And you'll notice we also get this db.sqlite3 when we ran our server from last time. We can just let it be for now and ignore it. What we want to do is with our virtual environment activated, actually create that first simple Django application. So what I'm going to type is Python manage.py, and then the keyword here is start app, and then whatever you want to call this first application. Since we're doing something really basic like a hello world type app, I'm just going to say first underscore app. Hit enter, and you'll notice that we now get this first app inside of our first project directory. So this is a Django application. You'll see that it looks kind of similar to what we had when we actually ran our first project, but we get some different files here. We get views, tests, models, apps, admin, and init. Let's discuss what all of these files stand for and how they all work. I'm going to jump back to the presentation now. Okay, so we created all those files with that start app command. Now let's discuss what all these files are for. Here we have another init.py file, and that's serving the exact same purpose as we discussed previously. It's just a blank Python script that, due to its special name, lets Python know that this directory can be treated as a package. Then we have the admin.py, and this is where you can register your models so that you can benefit from some Django machinery that basically creates an admin interface for you. And later on we'll see how fantastic the built-in admin features of Django are. It's a really powerful tool, and it's all built into Django. Then we have the apps.py file, and that essentially provides a place for any application-specific configuration. Then we have the models.py, and this is going to be a place to store your application's data models. And that's where you're going to specify the entities and relationships between the data. And that will make a lot more sense when we actually begin to play with that file. Then we have the test.py file, and this is where you can store a series of functions to test out your application's code. Then we have views.py, which is where you can store a series of functions that handle requests and return responses. Then finally we have that migrations directory or migrations folder. And this directory stores database specific information as it relates to the models. So the views.py and the models.py are the two files you're going to be using for any given application. And the form part of that main architectural design pattern employed by Django is the model view template pattern. And you can check out the official Django documentation to see how models, views, and templates all relate to each other in a lot more detail. But before we get started with any of this, we actually need to tell Django that we just created this application. We need to let it know that first underscore app actually exists. So what we'll do is go back to the settings.py file of our project and add in that first app. Then once Django knows about the application's existence, we can learn the process of creating a view and mapping it to our URL to complete this entire process. Let's jump back to the Atom text editor and do all of these tasks. Okay, here I am back at Atom text editor, and what I want to do is check out this settings.py that was created when we first created our project. And again, these are the Django settings for the first project. If we scroll down, we'll see a bunch of variables. The one we're looking for is called installed apps. And here they are. We see installed apps, and it's essentially what a list is with some string application definitions. And what we need to do is add in our own application, this first underscore app. You can see here that Django automatically adds its own default apps like authorization, administration apps, messages, etc., static files, all of which we're going to be discussing in future lectures. But right now, let's add in as a string that application we just created, which is first underscore app. And then what we will do is save this. I can just do Control S to save that, and that's saved. And with Atom, what's nice is there'll be a little blue dot here to let you know that you haven't saved it yet. To make sure all of this actually worked, we're just going to run the server again one more time and make sure we have no errors. So I will say Python space manage.py and then select that run server command. Hit enter, and as long as I don't get any errors, then everything should be working fine. I can just copy and paste this into a browser. Whoops, looks like I did Control C, which makes sense. Let's run that again, and I should right click this. So highlight that, copy it, and I'm going to input it into a browser and make sure it's working. And you can see here that I've input it into a browser on my other screen. I'm going to drag it over real quick, and we see that everything is still working. Good. That means the first app is working fine on the installed apps, so I will do Control C to exit out of that. The next step that we want to do is actually create a view. So now that our first application has been created, what we can do is create a simple view. And for our very first view, we're going to just send back some simple text, like a hello world. We won't concern ourselves with actually using models or templates just yet. We're going to discuss that in a future lecture. So what we will do is open up the views.py right here, and this is under our, let me minimize this. This is under our application folder. So we have views.py, and it says from Django.shortcuts import render. What we need to do is add in a little bit of code here. We also need to say from Django.http import HTTP response. And then I'm going to create a function called index, and that's going to take in request. And then it's going to return HTTP response, and I'm just going to pass in a string here that says hello world. Okay, so let's discuss line by line what's actually happening here. First, we had to import HTTP response object from the Django.http module. And then each view for this application is going to exist within that views.py file as its own individual function. And in this instance, we just created one view called index with that index function. And each view is also going to take in at least one argument. And for that HTTP request object, since it lives inside that Django HTTP module, by convention, we usually call this the request. But again, you could actually just call this whatever you want. This could be jelly donut as a variable. It really wouldn't matter. But by convention, we call it request. And you'll notice that regardless of what is passed into this function, it returns HTTP response and then this text, hello world. So each view must return an HTTP response object. And this very simple response object just is going to take in a string parameter representing the content of the page. So what I could also do is pass in some HTML in there, which we'll show later on. In order for us to actually see this view when we're running our server, what we have to do is map this view to the urls.py file. So I will open up here, first underscore project, and jump here to the urls.py and open that up. And you see here it tells you some information. It actually tells you what to do. So if you want to add an import, you say from my app import views, which is exactly what we're going to do, except in this case, it's not my app, it's first app. So I'm going to scroll down here, and you'll notice what is essentially looking like a list of function calls to URL, and I'm going to add in one more over here, and I will say, call this URL function, and this is where it's going to look a little weird because we're using some regular expressions, so you may want to review those as we go along, but we'll just say our single apostrophe there, or single quote, and then that little caret symbol, or chevron, it's also called, and then another single quote. And sometimes Atom will automatically post a double quote there, so just delete it. So that's the first argument. It's a regular expression, and we'll explain what that actually means in a second. And then we need to pass in the views.index. But what I need to do is say this: from first app, import views. So what is that actually doing? It's saying, okay, from that first app folder, import this views.py. And that means here, I can say views dot, and then call that index function, which remember that index function is inside here, views.py. So that's exactly what's happening here. I'm just saying, okay, from that first app folder, grab views, and then from views, I can call index. And then I will name this. That's the third argument. I will just say name is equal to index. And remember to put in a comma here to finish off that list. So what this is doing is it's actually mapping that application's view to this URL. So I'm going to save this. Okay, with that saved, let's actually test out to see if this worked by running our server again. And then after that, in the next lecture, we're going to discuss URL mapping in a lot more detail and other ways of doing it. So I'm going to come back up here and say python manage.py run server, hit enter, and then in my browser I'm going to jump back to this URL. I'm going to just copy this, put it in my browser, and then let's see if it worked. And you should be doing the same thing. And hopefully, if everything worked correctly for you, if I bring in my browser, you should see something that says hello world or whatever text you happen to put into that particular view. All right, so we just created our first Django application, very simple hello world, but we were able to create that application, create that view, and actually map it to the URL in the urls.py file. Okay, so coming up next, we're going to discuss a lot more about urls.py, a little more about URL mapping, and some other ways to do it that are going to be a little more efficient and a little better. Thanks everyone, and I will see you in the next lecture. Hello everyone. Before we actually begin working with Python Anywhere to deploy our site, we need to talk about GitHub, Git, and version control. When we think about deploying our project, it will probably be useful to have all our code hosted somewhere online. This way we can easily call it from the virtual server or hosting service we are using. So before we actually do that, let's talk about what is Git and what is GitHub. A really common misconception for beginners is that Git and GitHub are the same thing. They are not. Git is a version control system that helps keep track of changes in your code. GitHub is a company and the website that helps manage Git and hosts your files on their site. Git is an open source, totally free version control system. GitHub is a company that utilizes that and adds extra tools on top of that and hosts your files, your code on their site. They offer extra tools for collaboration and things of that manner. So the main idea for us is that you can have one repository with various historic checkpoints that you can always refer back to with a history of any changes. And that is what is known as version control, a different control over all the various versions of a particular file you had. GitHub is one of the most popular code hosting sites on the web, and it allows you to easily use Git for version control and keep hosted copies of your code on the web. And the first step is for you to go to GitHub and create a free account. Then we'll download Git to our computer and upload our project repository to GitHub. If you're already a student that knows how to use GitHub and create and upload to a repository, just upload your project folder to the repo you make and skip to the next lecture. For everyone else, let's go to github.com, explore how to use Git, and get everything set up online. I'll see you at github.com. Okay, so here I am at GitHub. GitHub basically offers two levels of service. One is free, And the free level of service basically works almost exactly the same as the paid version, except for the paid version, you get to keep your files private. If you're not paying and it's free, then you have to publicly host everything so anyone can see your code. Obviously, if you're a corporation or a company or you want to keep your code hidden from other people because it has proprietary knowledge, you would have to pay GitHub to host your stuff on there. Right now, we'll just focus on the free GitHub account. So what you're going to do is, if you don't have one yet, click sign up and then sign up for GitHub. You'll set up a personal account, username, email address, password, choose your plan. It'll be a free plan. And then step 3, some tailor your experience stuff. So don't worry about that. All right, so once you've signed up, then go ahead and sign in. I'm going to sign in right now. And you'll get something that looks similar to this. You probably won't have everything that I have here. You can see that with github.com, you can collaborate with other people and it will show their changes. So for example, here's a co-instructor of mine and there's his GitHub account and he's working on a project with me. So if I click on this, it'll take me to the project we're working on and I can actually view the changes. So in green is what is currently there and in red is what was removed or deleted. So that's basically the way you can collaborate with people on GitHub. And this is also really nice because pretty much every major open source project is now being hosted on GitHub. So if you ever want to contribute to Django or any other open source project, you can do it on GitHub with your account. But what we're going to be doing is setting up a repository. So we will click right here on New Repository, and you'll give this a repository name. So something short and memorable. So we will call this Django deployment example. You can give a description, so we'll say repo for our Django deployment example. And then I can set this private or public because I actually pay for an account here. Obviously, I'll set it public because that's what you're going to be doing. And whether or not you want to initialize it for README is up to you. We don't need one, so we won't do it. And then we can also say add git ignore, which is files that you want Git to ignore in its version control. We also don't really need to worry about that, so let's just create the repository for now. Okay, so then we have the quick setup. So if you've done this kind of thing before, which I assume you haven't, there's a quick way to set up this repository onto your desktop. Now there are many ways to do this, but we're going to be focusing on using the command line to do this, so we can interact with this in the Atom text editor. There's a lot of other ways, including a full desktop application that comes with GitHub that's free, that you can use to actually visualize this process, or you can just quickly SSH or use HTTPS here. What we're going to do is use the command line at our terminal or our command prompt. But in order to do that, we actually need to download Git itself. So far, we've only set up our account on GitHub. We need to actually download Git to our computer. So the way we do that is you come to this website. And this is, if you just Google search Git, this should be one of the first things that comes up. It's git-scm.com. So that's git-scm.com. And this is where Git, the free and open source version control system, is hosted. So you can download it. What you're going to do is, depending whether you're on Windows or Mac, etc., you're going to download it. So if you're on Mac, you may already have it downloaded on your computer, so make sure to check for that. The way to check is if you go to your command prompt. So for instance, here I just popped up my command prompt, or if you're on your Mac, your terminal, or terminal for Linux as well. To check if you already have it, go git --version, hit enter, and if you get something out, that means you actually already have Git installed, and you don't need to worry about this. It doesn't really matter what version. Really, any version should work that's been downloaded in the past, 3 years. But let me walk through the actual download process for you, especially if you're on a Windows computer, since that can be a little confusing maybe, especially if you're a beginner. So I'm going to click download for Windows. It says download is starting, and then it's going to download that for me. So it's about 30 megabytes. I'm going to forward in time for this download to finish. And then once you've downloaded either the DMG or executable, whatever for your format, go ahead and click on it. Make sure you downloaded the correct 32 or 64-bit. Allow it to make changes on your computer. Sorry if it went black there for a second. And then what we're going to do is say next, accept that license, go ahead and save it to Git. And then you can add some additional stuff to this. And I would just accept all default options. So just keep everything default. Click next, and then click next again. And here's where we have 3 options, especially if you're on Windows. The one you need to make sure is that it actually adds it to the path. So this one right here, it says use Git from the Windows command prompt. It says it's adding it to your path. That's exactly what you need, because if it's not added to your path, you won't be able to call it from the command line. So then you can click next. Then there's the checkout, either Windows style, as is, or other checkout options. You may not see this tab if you're on a Mac or Linux, so don't worry about it, but we'll just select the default again. Hit next. Again, you can hit any of these. Then we'll continue. And then we can just, again, go to defaults, and then you can hit install. So once you hit that, it'll begin installing Git onto your computer. So I'm going to forward in time until this installation is finished. So once this is done, we can just, don't worry about viewing the release notes or launching Git bash, just hit finish, and then go back to your command prompt, either in Atom or by itself, or your terminal. So once you've completed that installation and hit finish, you can go back to your command prompt or your terminal. Sometimes you have to restart your computer in order for this to take effect, but you should be able to now type git version, hit enter, and see the same version of whatever you just downloaded. In my case, it was version 2.12.0. Again, if you're seeing something that says Git not recognized as a command, try restarting your computer and then entering this again. If you're still having issues, go ahead and post the Q&A forums, but definitely search the Q&A forums for any specific questions that you may have. It's most likely that your question's already been answered about this. Alright, now that I'm here at Atom, what I'm going to do is inside Django Lectures, or wherever you so choose, I'm going to add a new folder, and this will be the folder that's going to contain a subdirectory of our actual Git repository. So you can call this folder whatever you want. I'll call it my_base. It really doesn't matter what you call it, but then what you're going to do is cd into my_base. And this is where we're actually going to initialize our Git repository. And all the commands we're going to be running are right here on this create a new repository on the command line. You don't actually need to worry about this first command. That's just going to create a README for you. We don't really care about that. So what we'll do instead is, and I'm going to collapse this so we see a little more room, is start with this git init. So we'll say git init, git init, hit enter. And this is going to initialize an empty Git repository right at my base. And then what I'm going to do is, you don't actually need to do the add. Instead, what we'll do is copy and paste one of our projects here. So open up the directory tree, and then any of the projects we've been working on is totally fine. I will copy the Learning Templates project from Django Level 4. Again, you can do anything. So we will copy this, and then I'm going to put it into my base. So we'll say paste. So now I have Learning Templates, and then what I'm going to do is do git add, and instead of the readme.md, because that's related to this, I'm going to say git add, and then just a period, and that basically means add everything. Alright, so note that we have some couple of warnings here about line endings, things like .py files. For now, you don't need to worry about these line endings. That's totally fine. So if you get a bunch of warnings like that, that's totally okay. Alright, so now that we've added everything, we're going to need to commit everything. And the way you can do a commit, it's also shown right here on this git commit-m first commit. You could just copy and paste that line, but I'll write it out. I'm going to say git commit, and I will say dot to commit everything that we just added. Say -m, and then a single quote, first, single quote. Basically, this message right here of first can be interchanged for any message that you will want to see on GitHub. So you can say something like, oh, added Learning Templates project, or fixed issue on this file, whatever. As long as it's just in quotes, it's a string, that's going to be the commit message. So we'll hit enter, and now it's going to be committed. And you should see something like, oh, it's creating a bunch of modes. That's exactly what you want. And then the next thing is to say this line, git remote add origin, and then the actual URL. So I'm going to, this one I am going to just directly copy and paste it. Going to copy this and then right click here, paste it, and then hit enter. That's all we needed to do. And then what next line is this one right here, git push -u origin master. So copy that, paste it, and you can always pause the video in case you need time to write these lines down. Hit enter, and this should push all the changes that we just made to GitHub. This might take a little while depending on your internet connection, and you may also be prompted to log in. So you see here, I was prompted to log in. You may be prompted to log in at your actual terminal, where you have to provide your email and password. I have a Windows desktop server, so I can just log in here. I'm going to do that now. So I just logged in, and now it's going to do it for me. Most likely, you'll be asked to log in at the actual command prompt if you don't have those settings like I do. But everything should have been pushed. So we see it's writing the objects, it's sending them online. So everything should have been pushed to the actual repository. So let's come back here. We can expand this window, and then click on whatever you happen to call your deployment example. But here, now I see learning templates, and it was pushed by JM Portilla. Right now, that's actually my personal GitHub account, and that's my dog Frankie sleeping there. But anyways, you should be able to see the files, and that's all we need to do for now. So it looks like, and there's their commit message first. Again, you could call that whatever you want, and we can see that the latest commit was 2 minutes ago. Perfect. That's all we need to do, and we are ready to go. If you have any questions on any of these steps, feel free to post to the Q&A forums. Make sure to search the Q&A forums to see if your question has been answered. This is a really common place where accidentally mistyping a character or not following the instructions exactly, or maybe just getting unlucky with the install can cause hiccups. Don't worry about it. I'm always here to help out, but make sure you search first because your question has probably already been asked before. All right, thanks everybody, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Hello and welcome to the Python and Django Full Stack Web Developer Bootcamp. My name is Jose Portilla, and I will be your instructor for this course. I teach over 100,000 students on Udemy and also work as a professional programming instructor, where I have trained some of the top Fortune 500 companies to use the latest technologies. I'm excited to finally share a virtual version of my latest Python and Django Full Stack Web Development Training course. In this course, we will be covering the entire full stack of web development, so you can build an entire website from the ground up. The course is designed to be a complete reference and source for you. Each section is intelligently organized based on topic, so regardless of your experience level, you can easily access the information you need. Whether you're a beginner who will go through the entire course, or a seasoned professional who only wants to reference later section, the course is designed for you. We'll start off by learning about front-end web technologies, including HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, JavaScript, and jQuery. Afterwards, we'll be focusing on learning Python, Django, and SQL for the back end of our web applications. Once we feel comfortable using these technologies, we'll start building clones of popular websites, so you can practice your new skills in a realistic setting. Each section has an assessment and exercises to practice your new skills, so you can always keep your new abilities sharp. The course is packed with content, including over 100 video lectures, explanatory code references, and concept presentation slides. You will also get access to our online Q&A forums, where thousands of students and I are happy to help answer any questions you may have along the way. Upon completion of this course, you can get a certificate of completion to post on your LinkedIn profile to show off to potential employers. You can try this course risk-free as it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Get ready to become a master web developer and launch your career to the next level. Enroll today and I will see you inside the course. Check out the curriculum page for full information on all the content in the course. Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture where we're going to be getting started with Django. We finally reached the moment we've been waiting for throughout the whole course, using our Python skills and all our front-end skills, along with the Django web framework. But before we actually dive into the technical details of Django, let's learn a little more about it and its really interesting background. Django is a free and open source web framework, and being a web framework, it really allows us to solve two major problems. It allows us to map a requested URL from a user to the code that's actually meant to handle it. And then it also allows us to create that requested HTML dynamically. So using templates, which we'll learn about later on, we can actually inject calculated values or information from the database into an HTML page to show to the user. So we're going to be really connecting all the front-end stuff to the back-end stuff through this web framework. And Django is extremely popular. It's used by many sites, including things such as Pinterest, PBS, Instagram, Bitbucket, Washington Times, Mozilla, and much more. You can check out the official Django website for a whole list of example websites that operate using Django's web framework. Django was created in 2003 when the web developers at the Lawrence Journal World newspaper started using Python for their development. And the fact that it originated at a newspaper is actually really important to the culture that surrounds Django. Because the original developers were surrounded by those newspaper writers, good written documentation is a key part of Django. And we're going to be exploring documentation as we go along through this part of the course. And that also means that you have excellent references to check out on the official Django documentation pages. Django has its own excellent basic tutorial where you're basically walk through creating a basic polling web application. And I would definitely suggest that you check out that polling tutorial later on throughout this course. And also the reason it's a poll is because that also extends back to its newspaper roots. If you're on a newspaper website, you may want to poll your readers to see whether or not they agree with the topic of a story. So when encountering Django tutorials, you're going to often read that you should use what's called a virtual environment, or you'll sometimes also see it as VENV. Let's talk about what a virtual environment is, how to use it, and why it's so important to use one whenever you're working with Django for a large project. A virtual environment allows you to have a virtual installation of Python and packages on your computer. So why would you ever actually want or need this? You've already installed Python, why bother with a virtual environment? Python packages change and get updated often, and there are changes that sometimes break backwards compatibility that your web application or web project may depend on. So what do you do if you want to test out the new features of a package update, but you also don't want to break your current web application? After all, you can't just take down your website every time a package gets updated. Well, that's where a virtual environment comes in. You can create a virtual environment that contains the newer version of the package, or a virtual environment for your older version of the package. And luckily, Anaconda makes this really easy for us. A virtual environment handler is already included. So to use this virtual environment with Conda, you're going to use the following commands. And we'll walk through this in just a little bit. But the conda create command initiates the virtual environment. So we say conda create space -- name, and then another space, and you type in the name of your environment. So in this case, I've called my environment my env there. And then the last word there, Django, is going to say, well, what package do I want to initiate this environment with? And conda requires that. So you will say conda create -- name, the name of your virtual environment, and then the package that you want to start that environment with. And later on, you can specify a specific version for that package. So you can say Django, something like == 1.9 or 1.8, 1.10, etc. And then you can activate that environment with activate space the name of the environment. And this all happens at the command line. Now, anything installed with pip or conda when this environment is activated will only really be installed for that environment. So that allows you to create separate versions of packages and Pythons all on one computer with the use of these virtual environments. And then you can deactivate the environment with deactivate my env, or the name of the environment. And it's highly encouraged to use virtual environments for your projects to keep them self-contained and not run into issues when packages are updated. Alright, so let's jump to our command line and show you an example of actually creating a virtual environment. Okay, here I am at the Atom text editor, and before we get started by walking through a virtual environment using conda, what I wanted to point out is that conda itself has really good documentation on creating virtual environments or managing environments, and it's linked to in the resource notes, but let me jump to that website real quick over here and show you what it looks like. Just go to conda.io/doc/using/envs for environments.html, or just Google search conda environments, should take you to this page, or just use the resource link. But this has a lot more details than what we're going to be showing here. Shows you how to create an environment, change an environment, clone an environment, remove, etc. So if you ever have any questions further than what we discussed here, you have this documentation that will walk you through all of these steps. So what we're going to be doing is creating an environment. And there's an example here, conda create -- name. They're calling their environment snowflakes, and it uses BioPython. So let's actually create a virtual environment that will create a virtual environment for Django for us. So I will come back to Atom, click plus here to open up my terminal. And then what I will do is say this, conda create -- name. And let's call this my Django env. And then I will type Django because that's the package I want to initiate my Django env or environment with. I will hit enter, and what it's going to do is download that Django package if I don't have it already, and then apply it to that virtual environment. And conda is actually pretty smart, and it will know that if you have already a similar version of Django somewhere installed on your computer, it may not need to copy it, it'll just reference it. That way you don't need to download anything, it'll just reference previous installations. I don't have Django on this computer yet, so what it will do is fetch that metadata, and let me expand this to show you what happens, and it will ask you, hey, these new packages are going to be installed, is that okay with you? And I will say no right now because I actually don't want Python 2.7, I want Python 3. So what I'm going to do is say no on proceed, and instead I will say this, conda create name, and let's say my Django env, and instead of starting it with Django, I'm going to start it with Python 3. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you an example of specifying a specific version of Python or a package. So it's a very similar process. You say conda create -- name, the name of your actual environment, and in this case, instead of a package, I will say Python, and then you say equals, and then you type in the version number you want. So for instance, I want Python 3.5. I'm going to hit enter. It will fetch that package metadata again. It will show me the new packages that will be installed. Here, I can see that I have the correct version of Python I want, 3.5. You can also do 3.6 depending on when you're actually viewing this course, if that's been added to conda. But let's stick with something 3.4 or above. So 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, those should all work fine for what we're going to be doing. I'm going to proceed on that, select Y, and then I will jump forward in time for this to all be downloaded and installed. I'll see you there. Alright, so that has finished installing, and now we actually get the instructions. So to activate this environment, we can use activate, and then the name of the environment, and then to deactivate it, once we're done using it, we can say deactivate, and that will deactivate the environment. And if we ever want to use it again, we can easily just activate it with the activate command. And if you're on a Mac or Linux computer and you're using Bash, you'll probably have to use source, so keep that in mind. Alright, now that we've set up our actual environment, it's time to activate it. A quick note, in case you forget what environments you have on your computer, you can easily list them through this command, conda info --envs, and this will list out all the environments you have. Here I just have my default Anaconda, the root environment, and then this environment I created, my Django env. And depending on what Anaconda version you initially installed, this may say Anaconda 3 instead of Anaconda 2. But let's actually activate this environment. If you're on Linux or Mac OS and you're using Bash, you will probably have to say source, activate, and then the name of the environment, Django env. Since I'm on a Windows computer right now, I don't need to specify source. So let's bring that back down to just activate my Django env. I hit enter, and it will activate the environment. And the way I can tell that the environment is activated is you should see here in parentheses my Django env. And that means that everything I do right now in regards to Python is going to only take effect on this environment. Which means if I decide to install Django in this environment, it's only going to be installed that specific version of Django for this virtual environment. In fact, let's do that now. I will say conda install Django, hit enter, and this will install the latest version of Django. And for this course, basically any version of Django that's higher than 1.8 should work just fine. So 1.8, 1.9, or at the time of this course, 1.10 should be fine. Let's say proceed Y. but I do encourage you to at least use 1.10. That way everything we do in this course matches up exactly with what's on your computer. Okay, I'm going to hop forward in time for this to finish installing and downloading. Alright, so that finished installing Django to this virtual environment. And if I want to confirm if this virtual environment is actually working correctly, I can just type in Python into this command line, and I notice that the version of Python here matches the version of the environment. If I were to say quit, and then deactivate this environment, so if I just say deactivate, notice I'm no longer in the virtual environment, so if I say Python now, I am back to my original installation of Python, which happened to be this 2.7 version. So that's a nice little confirmation that you're in the virtual environment and you're actually doing effects on that environment. Let's say quit, and we're ready to go. Okay, so we did a lot of housekeeping stuff in this lecture, haven't actually dived into Django, but a lot of this stuff is really important and it's going to clear you of headaches later on if you don't learn how to actually use virtual environments correctly. So by this lecture, you should have a full understanding of virtual environments, at least how to create them, activate them, and deactivate them. You can always reference that link in the resources if you want more information about the environments, and you should have installed Django to your virtual environment. Coming up next, we're actually going to get started with using Django. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the next lecture.